Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Escalampre. I work here in the Environmental Science and Design Research Institute at Kent State University. We are under the Division of Research and Sponsored Programs. We're one of the many institutes that you'll find throughout the Kent State University system. So thanks for being willing to attend the beginning research and drafting a proposal workshop. We'll spend the majority on how to get you started in research, but then towards the latter half of the workshop, we'll be getting into the semantics of drafting a proposal. So I've worked at the university for 7 years, and I do have a graduate degree in the physical sciences. So just as a disclaimer, this research workshop is going to focus a little more on the physical sciences. Specifically, I am a geographer. So I want you to keep that in mind, that things may be different based on the different fields. Or for instance, if you're an architecture major, perhaps you're doing a portfolio as part of your research, or some of the sources might look a little differently. They might be a bit more visual. So keep that in mind, and always consult your advisor or faculty mentor if you have any questions. Let's get started. So as I mentioned earlier, I support the Environmental Science and Design Research Institute here at Kent State. We are very multidisciplinary. We like to collaborate. We have currently faculty in nearly every college through Kent State. We also have faculty and fellows among probably 4 or 5 campuses. So we span out into the regional campuses. And that's one of the things we really like, is we like to foster multidisciplinary collaboration and bring everyone together. And that's because we believe that environmental science and design doesn't operate in individual silos, neither does nature. So one of the other things that we do, and the whole reason for this workshop, is because we are building research skills in students. Specifically, we are focusing on undergraduate students right now. So that's where this will come into play. And part of what I do is I run and head up the undergraduate fellows program. The great thing about this is you don't need any prior research experience. We're here to help you through that. And again, this is why we're having this workshop. But in addition, we have a variety of active fellows right now. The great thing is we take incoming freshmen all the way through graduating or super seniors. So we really like to bring a bunch of diverse majors together. Currently, we have a horticulture major, conservation biology, environmental studies. We also have a studio arts major and an architecture major. So this is a diverse group of students, but we like to get everyone together, collaborate, share our ideas, bounce ideas off each other, talk about all the different resources that are on campus and available to us, or even some of the upcoming events that we may have missed. So I encourage you, if you just want to stay in the loop with environmental information, to consider joining our fellows program. It's a really easy, quick application. You can find it on our website, www.kent.edu/ESDRI, ESDRI, which stands for our institute. The other great thing about being an active fellow in our program is we have eligibility for research funding and travel costs related to your research. So this is something, it's a scholarship. It's not open to all of the masses. It's only available to our active fellows. So this is a really good chance. This is non-competitive. And things you can use your research funds for, if you're awarded, include physical supplies, such as chemicals you might need, test tubes, maybe you need to rent a bicycle. We can help you provide for all of that. Another thing you could do is something intangible. Perhaps you want to attend a conference that's really going to help you get a better understanding of your research. Well, we want to help that. Or perhaps you need to drive to Cuyahoga Valley National Park multiple times to conduct your research. Well, we want to help with mileage and gas reimbursement. So all of these things that are entailed in research, our institute believes in, and we want to help you get that experience. So to help you get that experience, we want to help support you financially, but also by advising you, helping you connect with faculty. So please consider this. And again, you can find more information and the application on our website. So let's go ahead and get started with the beginning research portion of this presentation. Now, this is a little watered down, but there are 3 general approaches to research. You could do a literature review, and I've seen literature reviews that just sort of summarize all of the existing scientific literature out there. One that I am thinking of in particular pertained to recreation and wildlife. And they basically just summed up the results of every paper that they read and put it into a nice table and said, here are the current findings as of this year. Moving down the list at number 2, you could do a similar study with some sort of element changed. So let's say you were looking at the harmful effects of recreations and parks. Well, let's say that study took place in Texas and they were really looking at the harmful effects of birds. Well, perhaps you could take some similar elements of that study, but change the location of it to here in Ohio. Or perhaps instead of focusing on birds, you're going to do that in Texas, but now you're going to focus on herpetology and more terrestrial animals. So there are ways that you can mirror a study, but sort of changing something. Maybe the time frame is longer. Again, the location is different. Maybe the way you're going to analyze your results is different. So at least you've already got a stepping stone with number 2. So someone has already sort of done this work and you're going to tweak it a little bit. So moving down to number 3, and there is a caveat with that, which is why I put an asterisk after it, is sort of answering your own question. And this is sort of a going your own route, going where no one's been before. The nice thing about this is it gives you lots of diversity. So, you might be pulling in from multiple sources. Maybe you're using this author's methodology, but you're answering this question from a completely different work. And maybe you're going to analyze it using some other entirely new methodology. These things are all sort of parceled together when you're answering your own question. But the caveat of this is you might find that your research question is mundane or that it's already been done, or maybe it's really tough to find a way forward because no one's done this before. So there are no experts in this particular niche field. Case in point, when I was starting my research, I thought it would be so fascinating to see why there were so many raccoons at one particular Cleveland Metro Parks reservation. And then the more I looked into it, the more I sort of realized that, it's not that no one cares, but that's not really advancing the scientific field or the scientific body of literature. We know raccoons exist in Northeast Ohio. This is no surprise. So that's what I mean. My initial research question that I wanted to answer was really mundane and didn't really contribute anything to the existing body of knowledge. So just a word to the wise, just be careful if you are going to answer your own question. And they're not always necessarily indicative of this down arrow. They're not always least to most amount of work. A literature review can be a ton of work, especially if there's so many sources out there. But in general, this is the workload to type of research ratio. So something to keep in mind is that robust research is not for the faint of heart, but I do believe you can do it. And that's why we're having this workshop. So there's 3 things that will really help you: organization, perseverance, and a great mentor. So number 3, a great mentor, you could probably do without that. It certainly makes life a lot easier if you have a great mentor that you've connected with here at Kent State, but you could probably get by without one. You just need some guidance. And same with number 2, perseverance. That's nothing that I can give you. That's a physical trait. But what I can give you is number 1, and that's a way to help you stay organized and organize your research so that it's not so overwhelming, so that you can leave it at some point and pick it back up at another point and not have to completely reinvent the wheel, remember where you were at. So that's what this workshop is all about. We're going to come back to organization a lot throughout these upcoming slides. So this is just a pop quiz. To save on time, I just want you to sort of look at these sources or potential sources that are on the left. And I just want to call out a few. Take a look and just sort of ask yourself, or you can jot down on a piece of paper, is this a credible source? Because to begin starting research, you need to know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable to use to answer your question. So take a look at some of these. Again, jot down just a yes or no, a tick box if you'd like, or just sort of keep a mental note. For time's sake, we're not going to go through all of those, but I do want to talk about a few. In particular, the the fourth bullet, the promotional pamphlet or brochure, and further down the minutes from a meeting. And towards the end, we will get to that last bullet, theses and dissertations. Okay, so here are the answers. Now, as you can see here, these are not always cut and dry, yes, no, yes, no. A lot of these are dependent. But just so you know, a promotional pamphlet or brochure like this one here from Cleveland Metro Parks, absolutely, yes. Hang on to it, keep it, cite it, use it for your research. It is a credible source. And as you can see, this pulled out. This is one that I actually took for my research. And the nice thing is, this was really helpful for me. It's a snapshot and an overview of Cleveland Metro Parks. And the reason I used it is because Cleveland Metro Parks has so much info on their website. There's subpages, there's headings, there's little captions, there's clickable links that I couldn't find that information. But the information I was looking for was right here in this pamphlet the entire time. So yes, keep pamphlets and brochures if you think they will be helpful to you. You can always get rid of it later. And that's part of staying organized, I think, is that you need to keep all of these things until you're all done with research so that you're sure that you are not going to need this or have to reference and return back to it. I told you I was going to talk about minutes from a meeting, and yes, those are completely up for grabs. It is a credible source. Minutes from a meeting, and these often come out of conferences, or perhaps there's a report that came out of a meeting. Yes, use these for sure. And similarly, down towards the bottom, maps. Yes, now these are more visual. And so a lot of the arts and design aspect tend to use more visual sources, which is totally acceptable. But here's a map that I used for my source because it clearly delineates the boundaries of, in this case, Rocky River Reservation. So yes, this can be cited as well, even though it's more of a visual source. So let's get into the logistics of this. A great way to start finding sources and inspiration for your research project is to begin by using Google Scholar. And we're going to get into this here. So let me show you on a separate window. I'm just going to open up a new tab here, and I'm going to go to, just a moment, let me share my screen differently. Okay, so I'm going to move this bar that's in the way, and I'm going to open up a new tab, any version, Microsoft Edge, Internet Explorer, Safari, these will all work. And I'm going to go to Google Scholar. You can actually Google Scholar. So here it is. Here's the address, scholar.google.com. So when I click on it, it brings you a search box just like Google, but we're going to use this and it's going to yield academic resources mostly. So you can see it's already in here, but go ahead if you're following along and type in wildlife corridors. And you should see a list of results that come up. So as you note here, Google Scholar is searching a variety of sources. Let's see, here's JSTOR. This is sort of a clearinghouse. Here's another JSTOR article, but here's a website, corridordesign.org. So you can see it's searching a variety of sources. It's not just looking for journal articles. Something else that's really important to note is this left sidebar over here where it says time, anytime. So this is where you can start to filter your results by date. So if you want something that's incredibly recent, perhaps there's a lot of subject matter on your field, and you just want things that have only been out in the last year or two because there's just so much to cover. So start by clicking on since 2022 or start by clicking on since 2023, and these will give you the more recent results. It will filter it for you. You can also choose a custom range. Maybe you're just looking for what wildlife corridors, which was our keyword. Maybe you're just looking for what that looked like or what some of the foundational articles said. So you want to go back in time and you want to look at the 1940s through the 60s. That's where you would put in your custom time range. And I think this is also this block right here, the anytime block. It's a good tool for sort of giving you an overview. You know, if there's things since 1908 in here, you know that this has been around for a while. As you can see here, these brackets or the way that the time frames are broken up lend me to think that a lot of this is sort of newer research. Something else that's really helpful here to look at is the cited by number, and that's here at the bottom of every article. So this is an research article, this is a research article, this is actually a PDF, again, from this website, corridordesign.org. But this cited by, which is clickable, and it's at the bottom of each of these sources, this is a good indicator too. So this result right here, I'm going to draw attention to our first one, the ecological principles for the design of wildlife corridors. So this was cited by 244 people. So that means in other books, articles, official sources, they have referenced this ecological principles for the design of wildlife corridors article. So this is somewhat accepted by the community. It's being cited by a lot of people versus this PDF, which is cited by 67. Still good, but obviously not as high of a number. And if you were to click this link, I'm going to open this in a new tab just so we don't lose our spot. But if you were to click that cited by 244, you would see these are all the places where it has been cited. So this article, Ecological Principles for the Design of Wildlife Corridors, has been cited in connectivity measures, primate conservation biology. So you can start to get an idea of who is using this source that you're also considering using as a source. And this can help you find more sources as well. So if I wanted to look at the ecological principles for the design of wildlife corridors, I might throw this second article out, this primate conservation biology, because you know what, maybe I want to stay broader than just primates. Maybe I want to look at frogs, reptiles, amphibians, birds, mammals, rodents, all of that. Maybe I want to look at biodiversity from a holistic standpoint. So I'm going to throw that primate conservation biology out. However, this book, Landscape Ecology in Theory and Practice, this has me intrigued, and I don't know much about it. There is a brief, very brief summary, and of course, if I click on this and open it in a new tab, I can always expand that summary, but I also can come back to it later. So you can start to see how starting with one source in our original Google Scholar search of wildlife corridors, these two words here up at the top, leads to not only this source, but all of the other sources using it, or that might be in the realm. And then from there, we can sort of start to branch out and start to collect more and more potentially relevant sources. And for every source that I find, let me close these tabs. For every source that I find, I am sure to bookmark it. So we will come back to that in just a minute. Something else of note is that authors often tend to stay in the same research niches. You know, if you're an expert in wildlife corridors, for instance, then you probably have wrote other papers or books or published other articles about wildlife corridors because that's what you know, that's your area of expertise. So a cool thing about Google Scholar is you can usually click on, in this case we can't, click on the link of the author's name. So that doesn't work for Newmark here, but these authors are all clickable links. So down here, so let's do that. Let's go ahead and click our first author for the first result yielded, which is D.B. Lindenmayer. So when I click that, I see that these are other articles or books by the same author, and I see his credentials here. So, you know, these things all sort of resonate with me: forest ecology, conservation biology. So that in wildlife corridors, okay, I think this professor might be a good fit to sort of follow and delve deeper into. So as I scroll down the page here, this is originally by default sorted by how many people are citing David Lindenmayer, remember that's his name right here, David Lindenmayer's articles. So his most cited article or book is Landscape Modification and Habitat Fragmentation. And then here's this one. This is forest ecosystems. Here's Conserving Forest Biodiversity. So I see where his forest ecology background comes from, because a lot of these have forest ecosystem or diversity in the title. Biodiversity, an assessment for animal relocation. So I wonder if that might have to do with wildlife corridors. But this is another great way of finding more research sources to cite. And if you want to, you can also filter it instead, or order it. I'm sorry, not filter it. Order it by year if that's more relevant to you. You know, maybe you want to find the most recent publications. Simply click that and it arranges things by year. And this even shows us what is not published or accepted yet. It shows us what's in the works. And then you can just go back by choosing cited by. So you have two ways to sort everything that this particular author has published or is in the works. So let me back this up to our original search. I'm going to go back to our presentation. There. So we covered the cited by number that was at the bottom of each article. We discussed the filter by date, which is that red heading that says anytime in the left side margin. If you look towards the bottom, related searches, and that's a snapshot of the screen we were just on, those related searches, those will help give you some ideas of what else or where you can go with your research. So maybe you want to look at wildlife corridors in just one specific country in Africa. That's why Wildlife Corridors Tanzania came up. Maybe you are more interested in the human interaction component and how humans affect wildlife corridors. So that's going to be that bottom search there under related searches where it says wildlife corridors human intervention. So those are all clickable links that will, again, just repeat the Google Scholar search with those keywords. And so again, this will sort of help you start to narrow down, are you interested in studying Africa? If not, then don't search Wildlife Corridors Tanzania. Maybe you are interested in that human component. And so you're going to start to take more of a anthropogenic approach to wildlife corridors, which would be that wildlife corridors human intervention at the bottom. And those are just some examples of keywords. But knowing and keeping track of your keywords is very important. Again, we're going back to this, the three things that that a good, robust researcher has. And that first one is organization. So keep it in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. For me, I first started writing these all down on a Post-it note, and then I outgrew that Post-it note and went to a larger Post-it note. You know, they have those Post-it notes for your wall, but keeping track of your keywords is important because it helps you to know what vocabulary you've already searched and exhausted versus what vocabulary you still need to search. So when I went back through my long list, I realized, you know, it all starts to run together at some point. And I realized, oh my goodness, I've already searched wildlife corridors. And I've already searched wildlife corridors biodiversity. So I don't need to look at that biodiversity aspect anymore. Now I need to focus on that human component, that human intervention component, or that anthropogenic component. And then I started thinking to myself, man, did I search human intervention or did I search anthropogenic intervention? Or did I search visitor intervention? Or did I search recreationist? And all these things that you just wish you could remember are at least right there on paper for you to refer back to, because keeping it all straight up here is really tough and taxing. So let's think about that D.B. Lindenmayer article that I first showed you. It was the first result that was yielded in our Google Scholar search. I always bookmark a page and cite it later, for citing later, excuse me. You can come up with some clever titles. And plus, if you did find a source online, you need to have that article to refer back to. You need that DOI, that digital object identifier, or at least the website. That way you can cite that in your works cited page or your references page. And there are a lot of clearinghouses out there, JSTOR, Wiley, Elsevier, those are just a few. But A lot of them are out there. However, a lot of journals do require a paid subscription. And so that's a little stinky if you are a college kid living on a limited budget. So I want to tell you how to get around that. If we go to Kent State University's library, you as students of the university all have access to this. This is free to you. You just use your Flashline login. So there's the website there. And as soon as you land on the homepage, this is what it looks like. You can see that there are up at the top here, this is where I'm pulling from. So a lot of these things that will help you are under this research tools, this third tab. However, under the second tab, services, is interlibrary loan. And we're going to talk about each of these as I show you here. Let me open up our page. Here we go. So again, here's the university libraries landing page. And under research tools here, there's a lot more than I highlighted on the slide, but a nice one, this is how you can find a source. You can find a source here. You can see there's all sorts of government information. The databases A to Z is huge. This is super helpful. I just want to point out one that is called America's News. It's here under A. When you are, sorry to make you sick, America's News, here it is, includes the complete electronic editions of more than 1,500 US news sources and news videos clips. That might be really helpful in finding media coverage about yours. Or let's say you wanted to find that D.B. Lindenmayer article. Well, based on our Google search, let's go back here. So we know that it appeared in Conservation Biology in 1993. All right, so let's go back to our Kent State University library page. I want to show you again here under these tabs, research tools. Here is Journal Finder because it appeared in Conservation Biology in 1993. So I'm going to look for conservation. It starts to populate if you look at all these, right? Another good place to start checking for sources. All right, conservation biology, here it is. All right, so we wanted the year 1993. So you can see some of these start at 1997. So that's not going to include the article by D.B. Lindenmayer that I'm looking for. So let's go to something a little further back. Let's go here to the JSTOR because this starts in 1987, excuse me. Okay, I'm going to search the journal. And what was that called? It was called Ecological Principles for the Design of Wildlife Corridors. I'm going to start it. Here it was. It was the first yielded result from the JSTOR clearinghouse. There it is. And look, right here, I can download this. There's the full name. That was not shown to us on Google Scholar, but I'm going to go ahead and download it. And you'll notice it's free now. So this is great for Kent State University students. Now, based on the preview here, we have the entire article. All right, so I'm going to come back to this in a moment. But one other helpful source, in addition to these, there are so many on this university library website. I would encourage you to ask a librarian if you're not sure how to use it. Everyone there, including the student workers, is so happy to help you and answer your questions. So take advantage of those really important resources. They're there to help you and make your life easier. But some things that might not be on the Kent State University library website is Search Ohio. It's just another way to acquire mostly books in print. So if you're having a hard time finding it through the KSU library, try Search Ohio. I know a lot of the public library that I go to in Stark County, they have Search Ohio. That's their sort of sharing site. There's also Ohio Link, and I put that web address in the box below, etd.ohiolink.edu. So this is where you can find theses and dissertation dissertations at your fingertips. I believe it's different by state. Some states may not even have this clearinghouse. Some states, I know when I was looking for my research, required you to have an account. Luckily, here in Ohio, you don't need any of those. This is a free source. So let me show you what that looks like. Because theses and dissertations, they're not considered published articles or peer-reviewed journals. However, they are still a source that you can use. So let me show you, I typed in wildlife corridors here. Remember, those are the same two keywords from our Google Scholar search. Nope. Timed out. No big deal. Wildlife corridors. Here we go. And ironically, that is what I studied for my research. And here's my article here, my thesis. However, you can see there are, oh my goodness, there's over 20 pages with 10 pages or 20 results per page. So there's over 200 results with the keywords wildlife corridors. And as we go down this, these are all available to you. Here's someone who looked at plant biology. That was their major. So mine was geography. Environmental science, which isn't even a major that we have here. So this is from the Ohio State University, but this is focusing on a forest. So you can start to find other sources here. Again, these are free. And when you click on it, here's the PDF to download it. Usually these files are on the left-hand side. You click on it and voila. Good thing, helpful tip is to just search. Remember, I was looking at that human interaction. Well, the word anthropogenic comes up 62 times. So I can search each one by using Control F or the find feature, or you can just read the whole thing. You can read snippets. You could read the abstract on the first page, which is what I recommend. Here's the abstract. So just decide if this is even something worth your time of reading, right? There's the word anthropogenic in the abstract. So I would think this thesis is going to focus a lot on the human component of wildlife corridors. Okay, let's move on. So again, the database, the clearinghouse for Ohio, the state of Ohio, is free through public universities. However, that may not be the case with other states in the nation. So another way to find sources that are relevant to your research question is to find articles that are relevant. All you need to do is find one good article or an article that has one good piece in it. And that's where you can start spanning and spinning your search outward and sending those arms out to get more information. So again, we're back to the D.B. Lindenmayer Ecological Principles for the Design of Wildlife Corridors article. So as I read through this, usually what I do is I just read the abstract first, because the abstract sort of is an overview of everything. It tells me if this is even going to be in my wheelhouse. So in this case, there's no abstract. I believe they called it this introduction here. So I'm reading through the introduction and I see the phrases wildlife corridors, that first sentence, networks of wildlife corridors. So I see that. And I see where they're talking about data. I see where they're talking about this was for arboreal marsupials in southeastern Florida. That's all in that introduction paragraph. And the last sentence says, in developing a theoretical framework for the evaluation and design of wildlife corridors. Okay, I'm interested. This at least isn't a total no for me, right? It's not focusing on just primates, which we threw out as an earlier source. This is focusing on arboreal marsupials. So, okay, I want to know more about this after just skimming the abstract, so I read more. Let's go into that next section, which is the studies of arboreal marsupials and wildlife corridors. So as I start to read this, again, I know that their focus was arboreal marsupials here, so tree-bound or tree-living marsupials. And let's say that's what I want to do. Let's see, it took place in southeastern Australia. Okay, so for my research question, I plan on focusing on marsupials. This is right up my alley. So when I find a sentence that relates exactly or directly to what I want to study for my research question, I highlight it, I flag it if I'm reading it digitally, and I look at the citation at the end of that sentence. So in this case, the 49 retained linear habitats for arboreal marsupials that took place in southeastern Australia was also mentioned in Lindenmayer 1992A. That's what I put down here in this big yellow, I blew it up for you in this yellow box. So if that's also what I want to study, I'm going to highlight that sentence or flag it somehow, a little Post-it flag on there. And I flip to the back. I have an actual physical paper. I flip to the back to the literature cited. It may be called references, it may be called works cited page. And I find this same article right here, Lindenmayer DB 1992A, because that matches this sentence's citation up here. And that sentence was what I'm banking. And here I find it. As I read more about it, I see, oh my goodness. So it wasn't actually a published article, it's a report, because it says right here, report number 9. If you can, sorry, if you can see my arrow, report number 9. So I can go back to the Kent State University Library website. I can look up native forest research. We know the date, we know the report number, and that's how I can read more about what Lindenmayer in a different year found with these arboreal marsupials that were in 49 linear habitats. So this is a way of how you start to find more sources to bolster your question or to support some component of what you're going to research. So I've found it by reading it in the article, and I've found it in the references, which is down here. And after that, I can go actually download the article via Kent State University Library's website. So then I'll have it as another source, and I'll bookmark it and or download it. So before we get into the drafting the proposal part of it, once you have started to collect all your sources, I want you to know about some common software in research that you can use to help lighten the load in terms of all this that's going to be swimming around in your brain. Again, remember, this comes back to staying organized, one of those 3 components of embarking in research. So reference management software, so that you don't have to keep track of every single article, book, photocopy that you find. These 3 right here are all, I believe these are all still free, but they help you manage all your sources, like the one we just found for DB Lindenmayer. EndNote in particular seems to can import into Google Scholar directly, or not import, but the to link. So you basically will keep a digital repository of all your sources. And then you can start to decide, well, am I going to use this? Am I not? But at least you have it all at your fingertips, because this often happens in research. You go down your path of research, you get sidetracked or derailed by something, or some horrible pitfall happens. Like, oh my goodness, I can't even use half the data that I retrieved. Okay, well, now you kind of have to pivot and go a different route. And man, don't you wish you still had that source from that you found 5 months ago, but you can't even remember the author's name, so that you could look it up because they had to pivot in their research. Well, you know what? It's all stored in EndNote or Mendeley or Zotero. This is used by a lot of graduate students, and there's many more out there that are paid. I'm just highlighting a few of them. In terms of project management and group communication, this is great if you're working with a lab or you have multiple collaborators, or maybe you're a grad student and you are working with a bunch of undergrads and you sort of want to delegate some tasks. Slack, which now has some paid features, Trello, Basecamp, those are all used for project management. And you can sort of have different channels with different audiences and different team members involved. GitHub is still a major leader in file sharing and code sharing. I advise you to look into it. It's worth putting it on a resume if you know how to use it, or if you're interested in it, take a class, put it on a resume. It's great software. And then for working with large data, RStudio is a free open source app. It's great. I used it for mine. I was able to teach myself. There's a learning curve, but I think it's relatively user-friendly. Please note that you will see SPSS and SAS more in the social sciences. That's my experience, but it still could be applied elsewhere. So use this software. There's many more out there, but use this to help you stay on track, stay organized, and again, to help ease the burden so that doesn't have to all swim around inside your head, all your sources, everywhere you checked, every keyword that you put through Google Scholar, use these. So let's move on to the second half of this workshop, which is drafting your proposal. This will likely look different for everyone. And again, these tend to look a little different, even in the physical sciences. We see some differences here at Kent State between the geography department and the biological sciences department. But all in all, these 8 sections are kind of standard in a proposal, especially if you're asking for funding. Number 7 and number 8 are going to be much more relevant, especially if you're going to ask for some sort of financial support. But basically, an abstract is sort of taking 1 to 3 sentences from each of these. So it's going to start with a little bit of background information and paint the picture. And then you're going to drill down to your question. So you've painted the picture. Now tell me specifically what in that picture you're going to study. That's your research question, or maybe you have multiple questions. Your methodology, that's how you're going to actually go about doing it. And some, the blue portions here are sort of optional, but things that I've seen. So this may include your potential pitfalls, barriers that you might encounter to your research. And so number 4, maybe you don't have results because this is just your proposal, but a lot of people or audiences or advisors will want to know your hypothesis or hypotheses. So, okay, you haven't done the research, but what do you think you're going to find when you set out to try and answer this research question? Usually your committee or advisor, they just want to know that you've thought about this, that you've actually read some of the background literature, that you can form an educated opinion on this. So that's where that section comes in. So as you get to number 5, the conclusion, that sort of goes back to section number 4. So how do your results tie into this? Where are there some gaps that still need to be filled in? Why couldn't you, what are your conclusions? Why couldn't you get all of this done? Was it just simply too much? Conclusion is a very good way to wrap everything up. And that sort of goes and flows nicely into section number 6, which are the implications. So there's some deliverables here. So, maybe in this part of your proposal, this is where you talk about, I'm going to present my findings at the AAG, American Association of Geographers annual conference. Well, that's a deliverable. Maybe you're going to produce a manuscript or an article with your faculty advisor on this. That's a deliverable. Maybe you're going to present at the Kent State University Undergraduate Research Symposium and develop a poster. No problem. But a lot of people, when you're drafting a proposal, want to know what they're going to actually get out of it. They're happy to help you to learn research, but there's also, you kind of want to sweeten the pot for them and say, well, this is how it's going to positively affect you too. And that's how you build that nice working relationship. I win, you win, we both win. And then again, of course, timeline and budget with all things. Money rules everything, right? So here are a few suggestions as you start to draft your proposal. Most will also want a separate CV or resume attached as part of that. So keep your resume or CV up to date. Definitely include that you attended this research workshop. That gives you a little basis to know that, hey, this person actually has an idea, or has at least taken the time to learn about how to conduct proper research. When we're talking about timelines, that was number 7 on the past slide, that section towards the end. A Gantt chart is usually preferred in terms of, how long is this going to take? A lot of people's research spans more than 1 semester, or certainly even more than 1 year. So, they sort of want to know, when can I expect these things to happen? How quickly is this project going to move along? And so that's this is just an example I pulled from the web, but you can see this is broken down by month. So January, February, March, and the year was 2019. But you can kind of start to see how some of these phases overlap, like the research and planning phase overlapped. But that really, the planning phase was long done. That's this blue bar here at the top, but this planning phase was long done before anything even started to get implemented. So a good rule of thumb is to include, at least 2 sources for most of your sections. So if you want to justify your methodology and you want to justify why your research question is important, you should have at least 2 sources that you're pulling from that you can mirror or refer back to and say, hey, look, they did this, they were successful, this is what they found out. Here's why it applies to my research. So 2 is a minimum. This isn't a set number, but obviously the more sources you have, the more it looks like your research and all of your sources are thorough. And then a lot of people, again, money rules everything. So that budget, that's usually by line item. And I have a separate slide here just for the budget. So there's a few ways that you can arrange the budget in your research proposal. I would say the 2 are sort of categorical or temporal. The first that we see here on the slide, this first example, I took this just from the web, is sort of categorical. So here are your personnel services, right? The principal engineer, the senior engineer, broken down times wage. So, they work 10 hours a week times $10 an hour equals $100. What would go in this column. Then you could see things were broken down by equipment. Okay, so not a personnel service. So things are sort of broken down here by category, depending on what they fit into. And you can make these categories your own. Of course, they will be different for each person's research. I suggest using a spreadsheet. It's really nice because then you can easily multiply, add, divide, and as things and prices change, the Excel spreadsheet will automatically update. But you could also use a very simple Word document if you'd like. So this is an example of a very simple table that I made in Word, just to give you an example. So some of the things that people reading a research proposal will want to see is they want to see justification. So what is the point of purchasing these items, and what is the need? So is this something that the study cannot go forward with unless they have it? In which case that would be considered critical right here, critical. But if it's something that would be really nice to have, but the research can still go forward without it, I would call that supplemental. So in this case, labor. I'm trying to pay somebody $10 an hour for 80 hours. And the research that totals $800, that research can still go forward if this person isn't being paid labor. They're just going to have to be a volunteer, right? And do it gratis, for free. However, the research is critical to this camera here. So that, this research can't take place unless we have this particular camera. And here's the rationale for it. Also providing links to the official website, not, maybe an Amazon website, okay, but to the actual source website is very helpful so that people can see that, yes, this is an actual product. Yes, it is for sale. They can verify that the price of this is around $200 approximately. They can see how much shipping and handling and what the time is, all that, and some of the specs. So providing a link saves anyone who's reading your proposal a lot of time and effort, and ultimately they will appreciate that. So ultimately, here's a grand total down at the bottom of all of the funding that you will require or that you're asking for via a scholarship. Thank you so much for your time. I know we covered a lot here. I hope this didn't go too fast. You can always rewind and rewatch it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our institute. So it's ESDRI, which stands for Environmental Science and Design Research Institute, and that's at kent.edu. Any additional questions, any suggestions, or any feedback for things you'd like to see in the future, please feel free to email us. And thanks so much for attending today.